Hello, ngHouston. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Bonnie, and we're back for another episode of Angular Nerd Stuff. Today we've got Auth0 in the house, which is very exciting. I love the Auth0 crew. You guys are so much fun. So I want to introduce my co-host first. Bjorn, you want to say hello?
Hello, ngHouston. Welcome for another exciting episode today.
And Bjorn is actually sitting in front of the Houston skyline tonight, which is just awesome. So Bjorn, it's actually your fault that we invited these particular guests because you.
I was aware about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we were talking a couple weeks ago about networking in the Angular community, and Bjorn said he wanted to network with some authentication people, and I was like, oh, you gotta meet these Auth0 people because they're super fun, and I love the whole Auth0 crew. So I reached out to Sam. And so here we are. So Sam, Julien, you want to say hello?
Hi, yeah, I'm Sam Julien. I work in developer relations at Auth0, and I do a lot of stuff in the Angular community, and also a little bit with Gatsby and React and things like that. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I feel like you're kind of famous for, at least in my opinion, from the NG upgrade, because you were really helpful with that whole NG upgrade situation.
Yeah, that was my burden to bear. I got really frustrated with the upgrade process, and so I built a bunch of videos and content about NG upgrade and tried to help as many people as I could with it.
And we appreciate you taking one for the team, because upgrade was not always the most fun topic, I think, but it's really important, and there were a lot of people out there that were struggling with that, and I think you helped a lot.
Especially the start.
Emotionally gratifying. Anytime I go speak about upgrading, it's a very small crowd, but then the people afterwards are always like, "Oh man, I thought it was just me that this was so crazy for. I'm so glad that you gave this topic." So they're always. It's not as flashy of a topic, but it's definitely like an emotional connection with people.
Doing the important work. So we have a new face on the show. I think you've never been on the show, Kapehe, but you guys, I met Kapehe just a few months ago in Denver, and she's so awesome. Like I just love this girl. So Kapehe, you're working at Auth0 now?
Yes. So I'm an R&D content engineer. I write technical blog posts.
That's so great. So R&D, is that kind of exciting?
Yeah, I love it.
So you get to do all the brand new stuff coming out?
Yeah, whenever there's like something new, we get to like research it. So I get paid to like learn new things. So I love it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So cool. I'm actually very happy to have you on the show because I just think you're an extremely fun person. I thought you were a hoot. I met you in Denver, and I just really liked you a lot right off the bat. So
I bet there's also a lot of R&D topics surrounding authentication and privacy and all that stuff coming up right now. So sure, that's a big day filled of things to do right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, figured.
Absolutely. So, okay, so we were talking about what we're going to do on the show today, and Sam is going to run us through the Angular Auth0 getting started. So we're just so basically Sam's just going to go through and like try to authenticate an Angular app, and we're going to witness this whole thing live and see how that goes. How do you feel about this, Sam? Are you up for the challenge?
It's going to be an adventure.
But you said you're doing a brand new. This is a new getting started. The new Auth0 getting started by Kim.
Yeah. So we recently came out with a new SDK specifically for single page applications because there's been some changes with the best practices around that. And so, and we also, our main JavaScript SDK sort of handles a lot of different scenarios. And so it was getting bigger and bigger and harder to maintain. And it's still supported. It's not deprecated at all. But for single page applications, we have this new SDK that's a lot slimmer and just sort of specifically for single page apps. And so Kim Maida, we haven't mentioned her yet. She's the head of developer relations. She just rewrote the Angular Quick Start to.
We do love Kim Maida, by the way.
She's amazing.
If you're watching Kim.
Yeah,
I love you.
She's a fantastic person and also
she's really cool.
Great at her job. So
I said, is Kim available to join us for the show? And Sam's like, no, Kim's in meetings like, what did you say, 23 hours a day?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
she's very important. We're going to have to start being nice to her.
She's got a lot of things to run these days. So Yeah, so I figured we could just try to sort of step through that. It occurs to me now, I've got to figure out if I need any specific starter code, because we don't have. We're just going to do like ngnew and just like wing it and go from there, because I don't have a sample up. But I think the new quick start includes some component code. Yeah, it looks like it does. So we'll just see how far we get.
Start out with us. We have Matt Carniato in the chat. But he's not a serial killer. I was going to say the serial killer. He's not a serial killer. He's actually our friend. But we just like to pick on him. So hi, Matt.
Great entry.
What was I going to say? Oh, Sam, will you tell us the link where we can find the Angular Quick Start in case anyone wants to follow along? I mean, the Auth0 Quick Start.
I will paste that there. And I pasted it in our chat. Where do I should I post it in the live comments? Or
you want to do that? Or we can do it for you if you want. Yeah. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Perfect.
Thanks, Bonnie.
I just want to look. All right. I'm just looking to see, looking at our previous application, but I think that's going to be a little too complicated for this. So I guess I'll just share my screen here, and we'll just go for it and see how it goes. So I'm gonna share my screen, and I would love questions or interactions or something like that, because I don't want to just ramble through this.
I'm happy because I went to the page where the quick start begins, and I saw a tiny little picture of Kim Maida.
Yeah.
Sam, could you, before we dive in deeply and just get cracking, could you, like in a few sentences, explain what Auth0 exactly is and why you would want to use it?
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start. So Auth0 is an authentication and authorization service. So basically that means when you need to add authentication, like a login system to your application, you can either do it yourself and learn about JSON Web Tokens and figure all that out on your own, or you can kind of outsource that to a service, and Auth0 is one of those services. So we have SDKs in a variety of languages and for a variety of frameworks, so JavaScript being one of them, where you basically can, the process is essentially that you set up some things on the Auth0 side with your application, and then you use whatever SDK for your specific language to basically just sort of drop it in and configure it. And that way, just sort of out of the box, you can click on login, and you don't have to code up like the login screen or the login logic or any of the logout stuff. All you have to do is wire up the functions to the SDK, and Auth0 handles all of the token creation and expiration and all of that stuff for you.
Yeah, I understand. So before we are going to focus obviously on the Angular part, because this is ngHouston, of course. But you mentioned SDKs, and I see some install the SDK buttons there. If you were managing full stack, like a backend as well, and you would also still want to use Auth0, there's solutions to check the token that you've received upon authentication as well on the backend to make sure that we're talking about the same user, that all that is provided as a service?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So so if you have your Angular application and whatever your backend is, whether it's Node or .NET or Java, there's also an SDK for those, to where you can drop those in, and sort of Auth0 acts as sort of an intermediary between your backend and your front end, so that your backend can check if the token coming from your front end is correct, basically. Make sure that it's the right token. So all of that can be done through the SDKs and through configuring the Auth0 applications in the Auth0 product, basically.
That's awesome. So just a quick question that came from chat already. So we're already there.
Sure.
Like I'm sure we talked about SDKs for like all platforms, Java or .NET or whatever. Can you connect Auth0 to an Active Directory?
Yes, you can. You can actually, yeah. So because we're in sort of the web application world right now, we're kind of focused on JSON web tokens. But Auth0 actually does support things like SAML and Active Directory and other like enterprise connections and things like that.
Awesome. So to summarize real quick there, Auth0 is your go-to solution for anything authentication. Doesn't matter what platform. And for today, we're going to walk through the Angular version. So basically the front end part of doing all that right here, right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's get cracking.
Yeah. So we're just gonna follow this quick start and see what happens. There is the finished code is up on GitHub. I'll paste that in the chat as well. Well, looks like it can only post it there, so you can post it in the chat. So that's the finished code. So if things do go horribly wrong for some reason, then we do have the completed code there. So so the first step in this process is to actually configure the Auth0 side of things. So with Auth0, you have these ideas of applications and APIs. So I'm just going to go to my dashboard here, which I probably should have set up something else. I'm going to create a new tenant actually, and I'm just going to call this ngHouston test. So a tenant is sort of like the client of Auth0. So a tenant is like where all of your endpoints and applications and all of that stuff will live. So when you create a new tenant, you're kind of sort of setting up a new account, basically. It's not quite that simple, but for our purposes, it'll do. So when you first sign up for Auth0, there's a free plan. You don't have to pay anything, but you'll come to this dashboard page, and this dashboard page is where everything will live. So in our example, we're really only going to do Angular stuff. So we're just going to we're not going to have to mess with an API right now. And then these are all different extensibility points. Basically, you can pretty much customize everything in your authentication flow. For our purposes, we're just going to do some really simple stuff. So we're not going to have to dig into all this with kind of tapping into the authentication pipeline. So the first thing we're going to do is just create an application. And we're just going to give the application a name. I'm just going to call it ngHouston test. And we can pick what kind. So we support native, single page, regular web apps, and machine to machine, which is sort of like CLIs or services. So we're going to pick single page since we're doing Angular, and click create.
I just, to entertain the, like you just went over the big list of things we could use here on the left, like users and universal login connections. I assume there's things in there like a Twitter connection or using Facebook to sign up and all that. What we'll be using today, will we be managing users manually, or what will we be doing in that sense? So
we'll probably, because we're doing everything with development, so we do have the ability to use things like single sign-on with Google or Facebook or Twitter, things like that. I guess it depends on how far we get, but the one thing about those is that in development mode, the like silent refresh, like when you refresh the page, those development keys don't work with that. I actually we probably won't get that far in this. But for our purposes, I'll probably just use just like a regular login and password, just so that if we get far enough to implement the refresh, the silent authentication when you refresh the page. That way we won't run into a problem with that. It's really easy. You can generate those keys for free. It's not like a big deal, but it's just an added step in the process that we shouldn't have to worry about right now. So when you first create an application, it puts the quick start in right here, which is really handy. So you could just click whichever framework you're using or vanilla JavaScript, and it just loads in the same documentation that we have over here, which is really nice. What we're going to do now, though, is we're going to configure some of these settings. So let me be really helpful if I could like open this.
Could you zoom just a little bit?
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Yeah, thank you. I mean, my eyes are fine, but I can imagine on stream they might not look so.
Yeah,
not look so good.
Let me just try to make this a little bit easier.
Yeah, that works. It looks good.
Okay. All right. So we're basically setting up the application on the Auth0 side, so that Auth0 knows to generate tokens for this one specific client, and also knows like where to be able to use those tokens. So the important things that we're going to need in our application are the client ID and the domain, and we're going to use those in our Angular application in a bit. This is just, the client ID is just a unique identifier for the application, and the domain is the same as our tenant, basically. It's just where all of our Auth0 stuff lives in Auth0. And then the next thing we're going to do, so the way this flow works is that when you click login, you're going to get redirected to Auth0 to log in with your credentials, and then you're going to get redirected back to the application. So for security, the application on Auth0 wants to know exactly where you're allowed to redirect the user, and that's what a callback URL is. So we only want to specify, we don't want to be able to be redirected somewhere else from Auth0. We only want this one application to be able to be redirected from Auth0. So in our case, we're gonna use localhost 3000 for our application. That's what Kim's using in this quick start. So we're just going to copy, and we're gonna create a route in our Angular application called callback, and that's the route that will that Auth0 will redirect to after we log in. So I'm going to paste that in there.
Can I just try to clarify, if you don't mind me stopping you every now and again?
No, I don't. That's great.
Yeah, okay. Just checking. So does that mean that when you log in with Auth0, then you will always have the exact same, or like you can give multiple, I guess, but for a single application, you would have a single entry point to be redirected to with the actual token? Or am I just getting ahead of myself here?
So you can add multiple URLs as far as like different environments, but you're only going to have one point of entry back.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that basically puts the burden of rehydrating the application and making sure you reroute the user to the actual page she was at, or whatever you're trying to do there. That actually falls back on the front end as well. There's no
right.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand where we're at here and how that all clicks together there. So just trying to clarify for both myself and maybe anybody viewing. So.
Yeah. Perfect.
You're doing a great job, Bjorn.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good to see you.
So we need to do the same thing with logout URLs. So we only want to specify a specific URL that the user is allowed to be redirected to after you click the logout link. So we're going to also use localhost 3000 for that. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste that into there. And finally, there's another field called allowed web origins. And so allowed web origins are sort of another place that we can whitelist our application URL. And this is the way that we're able to refresh our tokens. So when we, let's say that we're logged in, we want to be able to persist or keep that session going even when we close the window. But we need to be able to have the application call back out to Auth0 and say like, hey, Auth0, is this user still authenticated? And if so, then Auth0 will send another token back to the client to keep us authenticated. So in order to be allowed to do that, we need to have this allowed web origins specified. Otherwise, you won't be able to do that, what we call silent authentication, basically. Okay, so that's everything that we need from Auth0. So I'm going to save that. We're going to use the domain and the client ID in a bit. So I'm going to leave this window open. And the first thing we need to do is we need to generate a new Angular app. So I normally use a light theme for accessibility on streams, but I can switch to a dark theme if that's the general consensus.
Let's try it out.
I just don't. I think it's harder to read on screen. Personally.
You guys missed it because before the show started, Sam was testing his setup to make sure, and as soon as he did that, Bjorn said, "Ooh, the light theme."
I was joking, of course.
I'll do material high contrast and see if that works.
My eyes already getting better here.
Just for you, Bjorn.
This is for you. And if I get attacked for not being as accessible, then I'm blaming you, Bjorn.
That's fine. I'll take it. That's cool. Yeah.
So I'm just going to we're going to start from scratch here. So I'm just going to do ngNew. So I'm going to create a new Angular application. And I'm just going to call it ngHouston test just to match our Auth0 application. It doesn't have to match, but just for our purposes. Let's see. Do I want any flags? I'll add the skip test flag. That's probably all I need.
Probably want some routing in there.
It'll prompt me for routing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I do want routing, and I'll just use CSS. Testing my CLI skills. So
looking solid so far. Oh, you don't have all this in cache. So how's your internet connection? Want to talk about that for a little bit?
So for those of you who don't know, I live on a small organic farm in the Pacific Northwest.
Cool.
And so my internet is decent. It's actually doing surprisingly well.
I was going to say, that's not looking too bad, honestly.
Yeah, it's actually,
I'm really
I mean, it's nothing compared to what I had in Portland, but it's pretty decent given that I live like out in the woods with chickens and llamas.
Wow, that's so cool though.
I want to live out in the woods with chicken and llamas.
Yeah, it's pretty fun actually. Okay, so I'm going to open up my ngHouston test here. And let's see. So we just got a basic Angular application, and we have the new shiny starter page that Stephanie flew and designed. I don't know if you've seen that. We'll take a look at it really quick.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Just because it's so
I didn't even know I needed it until I saw it.
I didn't either. Yeah, I didn't really think much about it, and it's actually quite lovely. So I'm going to stop this for now because we're actually going to change the port. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install, let's see if I can, probably don't need, just do that. Okay, so we need to install the library. So like I mentioned, we're going to use Auth0 spa.js, which is the new SDK for single page applications. So I'm just going to say npm install, save Auth0 / Auth0 spa.js. You could also use Yarn. I don't ever use Yarn with Angular, but
when that's running, you say this is the new single page application library or part? When is it released, and what's
it was released over the summer. Kapehe, do you remember? I think it was over the summer.
Yeah, it was about 2 months, 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Talking to 3 months ago, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so if people out there are using, so the other SDK is auth0.js, and if people out there are using that for a current project, like, don't panic. It's not deprecated at all. It's still being maintained. It's still like the robust JavaScript library. It's just for single page applications. This is sort of a slimmed down. The footprint is like way smaller because auth0.js is meant to handle a lot of different use cases. But you don't need to like run out and migrate over to auth0 spa.js unless you want to.
But it just sounds like so much fun.
Going to the spa, is that?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let's.
Don't go to the spa, Sam. We migrate to the spa.
Yeah, migrate to the spa. Sounds like a nice day out.
Right?
Okay. We're going to import it, but we're not using it yet. So I'm going to scroll down. You can also use the SDK from a CDN. I don't know why you would want to do that, but maybe you do.
Not in the Angular world, you wouldn't know.
Yeah, I don't see why you would. Okay. Kim's got a lot of great documentation here that you can read. Oh, I skipped ahead. Okay.
So here's a quick question in the meanwhile there, Sam, if you don't mind. I think it's appropriate for now. Sean says it's a beginner question, but I think it's a pretty good question right there, Sean, so don't worry about it. What's the benefit of...
are good questions.
Yeah, what's the benefit of using Auth0 over something like Firebase authentication? And just before you go on, answer that. At the start of this, when we started, basically, there was a similar question like it, but I guess this is a nice expansion on that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Coincidentally, Kim actually wrote a while ago, and I later updated an article on Auth0 and Firebase. Let me see here. It actually does a really good job of detailing. I think it's this one.
I think if you click on those icons on the right, the top icon says comments, and if you drop it in there, then it'll go straight to the YouTube channel.
Let me try that. Yeah, let me see.
Or we can put it in.
Yeah, he has to sign in, so I don't think that works.
Oh, yeah, it won't let me because I'm not.
Oh, he just...
He's gone, you guys.
Don't panic. This is just a mere technical difficulty. Don't go anywhere. He'll be back any second. It's quite hilarious, though. Let's be honest.
Oh my gosh, he is gone.
Sam just couldn't handle the pressure. Nah, we'll be fine.
And that's our show for tonight.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, this is all your fault, Sean.
I'm sure he's either completely disconnected, although it was way too fast for it. There he is. Welcome back, Sean.
Sam. That was awesome.
So I tried to sign up for an account, and
the studio
disconnected me from the stream. So
all right, let's be honest. We should tell StreamYard that's a possible feature request. You don't want to hijack the complete browser when you're in.
That's
right.
So
let's hit him up on Twitter after and tell him about this. Let's continue where we were and pretend this never happened, shall we?
Yeah, I guess we'll just continue this never happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your screen sharing has also stopped, so you.
Let me go back to that. Screen share.
This is live television. Live television,
people.
These things happen.
Okay, so I am going to safely put that link that he was talking about over in the comments. So let's just keep Sam where we need Sam. No more linking in the comments for you, Sam.
I guess, yeah. I'll just post them in the private comments, and then you guys can.
Yeah.
So there's actually a great answer to that at this article that Kim wrote and I updated later on, where it sort of goes through the details of why you would use Firebase's built-in authentication. You can actually use Auth0 in conjunction with Firebase because Firebase lets you create custom tokens. So basically, if you kind of don't need to customize anything, you could use Firebase's built-in authentication. But if you have some need to a big common one is this integrating with social providers, or like we mentioned, Active Directory, or you need to, enrich the profile by adding data, or you need to meet compliance regulations. So sort of anything beyond a kind of basic use case, it's a good idea to use Auth0 either in conjunction with Firebase or on its own. So for very, very simple projects, you're probably fine with just built-in Firebase auth. Does that answer your question, Sean? You want to go read that? And
no, don't go read that. Read it later. Stay here.
Let's continue. And then if he has any questions, I'm sure you can link your Twitter at the end and he can ask you directly.
Yeah,
so
sure. I always find that with like authentication, there's really no such thing as like a beginner question or a dumb question, because authentication is really hard. Before working in Auth0, I basically only knew what I needed to know to get my job done, and that wasn't very much. And so there's no worries at all about answering this stuff or asking this stuff. Okay, so getting back to our application, one thing that's in here, we were using port 3000. I'm not exactly sure why we want to use port 3000, but because we already configured everything to do it, let's just go ahead and keep it that way.
Yeah.
So
quick little note there.
I'm going to add in our ngserve, I'm just going to add the port flag. Let's see, let me close that. I'm just going to add port 3000 in our package.json.
Could do that in the Angular JSON as well, but sure, yeah.
Oh yeah, I suppose that's true. You could do that in the
just use ngserve, bold.
Yeah. Okay.
Doesn't matter.
So we've already installed the SDK. So now this is interesting. So we're gonna create our authentication service. Actually, before, I guess there's really no point in having all this stuff in here, but we'll get to that later. We'll just make like a really, really basic component or something. So what we want to do next is create our authentication service, basically. So the authentication service is what's going to interact with the Auth0 SDK. And so to do that, we'll just use ngGenerate or you can use G as a substitute for that. You can use service, and then I'll just call it auth. I think you can also do this,
yes,
right?
Yes, you can. You were testing your CLI question, so yeah, I can confirm that
not
works.
readable, but for beginners, you would say ngGenerate service auth, and we'll let that go. That took no time at all. Okay.
Didn't add it to a module though, so that's interesting.
Yeah, because of provided in root, you don't need to do that anymore.
Too easy, drill sergeant. Too easy.
Too easy. Okay. So the auth service. So here's the interesting thing about the SDK. So the SDK works with promises. It's promises all over the place. And you may or may not know that Angular is not exactly a promise first framework. It's an observable first framework. So there's some RxJS wizardry that has to be done, because most of our other quick starts, like with React and Vue, they use things like async await to handle the promises. And so Kim, mostly Kim and I, and we've collaborated with some other folks in the Angular community to work through how best to handle the SDK with observables. And so Kim's tried to find a nice balance of readability with, you could make some of this like slightly more elegant, quote unquote, but it would become so difficult to read that it would be very hard for beginners to work their way through. And as it is, RxJS is already hard enough to work through as a beginner. So
I really think that adding all of the comments in there is so nice for readability. And I mean, without going through like I've seen Kim on stage many times, and she's such a good teacher because she to me, the best teachers in our community or the best teachers anywhere are the ones who make the complicated stuff seem very simple. And Kim's very good at that. So I'm sometimes elegant is like, you want elegant code, but adding all of those comments in there, I think does not make it less elegant. I think it makes it more elegant, really, because it's just so easy.
Yeah, I
shouldn't use that word
am the kind of
because it's not that easy when people are learning. But Kim is,
Yeah,
you grasp it,
English just normal.
Yeah, we should definitely put a link to her Angular Connect talk, which that was all about authentication in Angular. Because she goes through the beginning of it is all about sort of the authentication flow in single page apps, and then she dives into the Angular stuff. So the first thing we're gonna do,
she has the best slide too.
Oh yeah, she's a slide queen. She's like a slide wizard.
I know
a lot of stuff from doing talks with her. She's taught me a lot of keynote tricks. So rather than just like copy and paste this, I'm going to just sort of like retype parts of it, just so I can explain what's happening. And I don't know how much time do we have? What are we doing here? What's the?
We normally go for about an hour, give or take, but we're fine. We can try to get through it. I try to shoot for an hour, and I think we're doing fine.
All right,
but we can go over a little bit if you're just trying to get to a stopping point, because we might have some people that have to get back to work, but they can always come back and watch the end later if they need to.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's mainly up to you, but if you want to have a target, then there it is.
All right. Okay, so let's just sort of build out this authentication service, and just so we can understand what's happening with it. So the first thing we need to do is we need the SDK has an Auth0 client. And so the first thing we're going to want to do is create an instance of that client on the service. So I'm going to call it Auth0 client, and it's going to be an observable of the client, basically. So we're going to do this, and we're going to use the from operator. And let's see, start all of our imports here. And so we're going to be using a function called create Auth0 client. And actually, let's import. I'm just going to import these couple things. So we got to import create Auth0 client from the SDK, and then there's also a typing of Auth0 client that will make our lives much easier if we use that with TypeScript. So in this auth service, we're going to need to specify our domain, and we'll come back to that because we can set that in the environment, and the same thing for client ID. And these correspond to those values that we saw in the Auth0 dashboard. And then we're also going to specify our redirect URI, which we can use window.location.origin, and then use our callback route that we're going to create. And that was the route that we used in our allowed login URLs, our redirect URL that we specified earlier. And then we're going to type this as an observable of Auth0 client, that type that we imported before. And then, so we're creating an observable here of the client, but we want to also make sure that we don't want to, every time somebody subscribes to this Auth0 client, we don't want to create a new instance of it. We want the same client everywhere we call it, everywhere we subscribe to it or do anything with it. So in order to do that, we're going to use what's called the share replay operator in RxJS. So I'm going to do .pipe, and I'm going to say share replay, and I'm going to pass in a buffer size of 1. And as Kim says in the comments here, this just means that every subscription is going to receive the same value. And the buffer size of 1 means that it's only going to remember 1 instance, basically. And then we'll just add a catch error here, just in case and import, oops, that's the wrong thing, catch error. And we'll just throw an error if necessary. Okay, and then we need to import these. Just go ahead and copy this over. And
throw error seems to be from our, yeah, there you go.
I was getting so excited about the share replay operator, and then my internet froze.
Oh no. Okay. So there are a couple of other things that we want to specify on here. We want to be able to check whether a user is authenticated. We want to be able to handle the redirect callback. We also want a way to deal with users. So let's wait on the users part. Let's think about this from the standpoint of like what we want to get done first. So we definitely are going to want to know if we're authenticated. And to do that, we're going to need to create another observable, and we'll call Auth0. The SDK has an isAuthenticated method that we can call. So I'm going to create a new instance variable called isAuthenticated with the $ for the observable. And now I can use that Auth0 client, but it's an observable, so I can pipe in whatever I want to do. So this is the challenge of RxJS sometimes, because this looks extremely complicated. But when you break it down, it's not. So let me just type it out really quick, and then I'll break down what's happening here. So that. Okay. And I got to create. We're gonna create a property called logged in. Yeah,
it's underneath there. It's defaulted to false.
And so what's happening here is we've got this Auth0 client that's an observable, but the client is the SDK that has a bunch of methods on it. And we can actually, let's just look at the documentation just so you can get a better idea of what's going on here. So I'm here at the repo and just going to get the documentation. Let's see. I guess that's not what I want. I want the API reference just so I can show you. Where's my, there we go. So the Auth0 client, we can link to this in the notes, but these are the methods that it has on it. So you can do things like get the token with a couple different methods. You can get the user. Handle redirect callback is what happens when you get redirected back to the application and need to deal with the token and the user profile and all that stuff. And then isAuthenticated is this method we were just talking about, and it's a check if there's valid authentication through Auth0. So what we're doing here is we've got our Auth0 client, and in order to call a method on that and use it as an observable, we have to use some composition here of some RxJS stuff. So we have to use concat_map, and concat_map will then pipe the isAuthenticated method. So we're basically calling client.isAuthenticated and processing the response, but we're transforming all of this into observables instead of using promises. And then the tap method is just the way that we do a side effect without modifying anything. So we're getting the response, and then we're setting our logged in proper instance variable to our response. So it's either going to respond with true or false. And now we have a property on our service that tells us whether we're logged in or not. So the using RxJS with this stuff is going to seem like it's a lot of work and really complicated, but it's actually going to save you a lot of time in the long run, because you'll be able to just naturally and sort of idiomatically use these methods throughout your Angular application without having to constantly be using like .then or async await. You can use you'll be able to use like the async pipe for some of these things, and it'll make your life easier with Angular if you sort of take the time to set up this RxJS code.
I think this is a really nice pattern. And you're right, it seems complicated, but in this file, once you get it set up like this, you can call it from any other feature branch, and it's super easy to implement.
Right, exactly. It's sort of takes some time to wrap your head around it at first, and but once you're actually using it, it starts to make a lot of sense. Let's see. So let's also implement this handle redirect callback method. So this is what we'll call after we log in. Actually, let's just do login first, because
makes sense. Yeah,
it would actually make more sense. We can do it with the flow of the application. So we're going to, I guess I don't need my terminal anymore. So we're going to create a login method, and we'll use we have to pass in a redirect path. In our case, most of the time, we're just going to be using just the root of the application. But this would be in case we need, any sort of app state or anything, like from a route card. So here's where we start to see sort of the benefit of the RxJS stuff. So we've got our Auth0 client, and we're going to subscribe to it. And when we subscribe to it, we get an instance of the client, or it's the instance of the client since we're using share replay. And then we can call our login with redirect method. So this is what will send us over to Auth0, and it'll pop up the Auth0 login. And then we're going to pass in the redirect URI that we want, which will be our callback method that we had mentioned before. So do this, and then we can pass in this optional app state parameter with our redirect path. Okay. So once that happens, we're gonna be sent over to a callback component. So let's see if we can just add in just trying to think of the simplest way to demonstrate something that we can actually see. So it'd be nice if we could just create our component.
If you put it in, I don't know what would be the easiest way. You could just even console log it, I think, for the purposes of just demoing it, because otherwise you're going to end up creating a UI, which you don't really need for this.
You kind of want to maybe just a button, so you click it and then it fires the login or whatever. So
yeah, we could actually just
maybe with a click.
Yeah, so let's just add, let's just put it in ng on a knit, just so we can see what happens.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So we'll just do add on a knit. I don't know why I'm not getting, oh, there we go. And we'll just go ahead and import our authentication service. What do they call it?
It's called auth service.
Auth service,
yeah.
And that way we can just say this dot auth dot.
Hasn't been imported yet, so.
I don't know why it's not auto import.
Yeah, It happens. You need to maybe restart VS Code at some point. It does that sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, and then I can't remember this. Yeah, okay. So let's try that. Now, in order to get this to work, what we're going to need to do is add in our environment stuff. So in our environment, when we go back over here, well, we could skip this for now. We could just hard code. Let's just hard code it for now, just so we can see something happening.
Yeah, I understand the willingness to show the good practice there, but
yeah. All right. Where did my?
It's on the other screen, I think, on the right behind it.
Ah, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So we got our. Let's copy our domain over, and let's copy our client ID, and that should be. Let's just discard that. All right. So let's just see what happens when we run ngserve. What should happen is we should get sent over immediately to the login page when we go to localhost 3000.
Real quick,
we believe
you didn't
in
ngserve.
right.
Yeah. I was looking at it.
I should have done it. I should have done it.
You should have done an Angler, Jason.
Yeah.
Better
Matt
practice.
says you guys should put out a schematic for this.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good one, Money. I have a couple of questions as well, but I'll keep it for later because I feel that's beside the point of what we're doing, like we're trying to show here. So we'll get to it probably.
Yeah. I'll just do npm run start. npm start. Okay. So wait for that to compile. Go to localhost 3000.
Moment of truth.
There we go.
Instant redirect. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened there is the ng on init fired off the login method, and then the login method called our auth0 client, and we got sent over to our redirect page. So now what will happen if I log in? I just have a previous user, and I'll click login, and oh no, it's not going to like that. How do I do this? Should be this one. Wrong. Okay, so I'm just going to sign up. And I will do this and create a new login.
There's also a quick start on how to use a password manager. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the first time you sign up for an app, it's going to ask you if it's okay to access this application and this tenant. So you just click check, just click yes. But now look what happens.
Oh yeah,
Hard to see it. What's happening is it's trying to redirect us to the callback route, and we don't have a callback route, and so it's freaking out and eventually crashes. So that's what we need to handle next. Is the ability to redirect, to be able to handle that callback, because you see what's coming back here is a code that will then be used to exchange that code for a token. So we need to make a callback component, and we need to implement the method that's going to handle this with the SDK. It's 10 o'clock. We can, it's up to you guys if you want to keep going with this or if you want to save this for another time.
We have a couple people that have started dropping off the live stream, so it might be good to wrap up because I know a lot of people over in the US have to get back to work because this is in the middle of their lunch break.
Sure.
But I think this is, I mean, you got through this pretty easily with I know you're experienced, but I think that this was pretty easy to follow. I really like the RxJS a lot. And I like the way that you guys set up this demo because I just think it's a very clean pattern.
Nice.
I gotta say that I love the RxJS conversion too. I do have a wonder, like the async pipe also handles promises, right? So I understand RxJS is closer to the Angular like language. Basically, they speak the convention they follow themselves, but I don't really see a reason why everything of these, like all these promises, would have to be wrapped in exactly like in observables, just for the sake of using observables in a sense.
Yeah.
It's the Angular way.
I know. I'm not disagreeing with it, but
it's authenticated. Probably, you could get away with using that as a promise. Some of it gets a little more complicated though. So for example, like when you're trying to persist the user profile, we make a behavior subject for that so that we can remember it and subscribe to it. And then some of actually part of the reason we did this was if you try to use the SDK with async await, so we didn't get to the sort of initialization logic, which is, where'd it go? This local auth setup. This is when we go and we check if we have an active session.
I see. Yeah. So that also relies on it being an observable there. Yeah.
Right. So what was happening? If we look at, we can actually look at the React quick start to see what sort of the default way of doing it. This is using. They've updated this to use hooks.
Oh, it makes sense, I guess. Yeah.
So we've got this line here of create Auth0 client and async await. What was happening is when Angular loads the application, because this is asynchronous, we were getting multiple initializations of the client when we were trying to do it this way. So that's sort of where this all came from. A handful of us who were trying to implement it early on, working on this quick start, we're having a lot of problems trying to use async await within Angular. And I think it was just because it was not idiomatic. It's not the way the framework is expecting these things to initialize.
Yeah, exactly.
So then once we went down the path of converting things to observables, it was difficult to then pick and choose what would not make sense, you know?
I completely understand the reasoning, but I think there's some. No, actually, it does look pretty easy. The way you're just clicking through that whole login part, like it's basically the starter from there is just follow what's been written and do the same thing, right? So it's not necessarily more complicated, but it does clutter up your start. So
yeah, so there's a blurb that Kim wrote in here about why we're using reactive stuff. Our goal is really to abstract this out. We would like to make, so with React, the team actually made a wrapper with hooks, and so we're trying to do something similar where we can abstract away. It'd be really nice, for example, to just sort of like have a handle off callback method that you basically
like a default function basically to overload. Yeah.
So we're hammering that out to make this a little bit less convoluted, as far as like you having to manually convert all these things to observables. It would be nice to have sort of a wrapper. So we're figuring out where we want to go with that. But we thought by providing like the most idiomatic way possible, then if people want to go back to promises or sort of figuring that out, like that's totally
cool.
I
understand.
Yeah.
And one more that really just piqued my interest as a curiosity, like how it works. Like you have the Auth0 client that you subscribe to at certain point. I think that's in the login, if I'm not mistaken.
You can you basically will end up subscribing to it. You want to call one of the functions off of it.
So what my question here is that the Auth0 client that we turned into a stream here originates from a promise, and when a promise resolves itself, does it automatically complete as well?
I believe.
And I think you see why I'm asking that question as well.
So the reason the client that like initializing the client returns a promise is because it's setting itself up, but it returns the actual client. Mm-hmm. So this create Auth0 client is what is the promise that resolves, but it does return an instance of the client, and so that's my understanding is that's what gets stored in the share replay is the initialized client.
All right, yeah, but and the auth service never gets torn down, so there's no need for teardown logic on the observable there.
I don't think so, since it's a promise and not a stream of real-time data or anything.
But when we turn it into a share replay, we turn it into a subject and it'll under the hood, so it will run. But I guess it's not necessarily an issue because you get redirected all the time.
Yeah,
it's just something that piqued my interest. Like, how does that work under the hood there? Because
that's a good question. I don't know if we need to add a teardown for that or not. I don't think we do. I think because we end up getting redirected so much through the login and the log out and everything, it doesn't seem like it's super necessary, but I could be wrong on that.
Let's discuss it maybe some different time if you're interested. So Sean has a comment there that the more you see is Angular, the more you see RxJS. Well, yeah, Angular picked RxJS as its chosen child, so they use it a lot, and everybody that uses Angular, basically has to default to it. So, but RxJS is definitely a very powerful tool that's super useful when you make friends with it, basically. And that's why I understand why Auth0 put so much effort and time into turning this startup, making it all observables, even though by default they don't offer it that way. So that's great to see it like that.
RxJS definitely has a steep learning curve, but it pays off after you get through it.
Just embrace it. Come over to the dark side.
Yeah.
It was really hard for me to wrap my head around RxJS initially, and especially because there are so many operators and it's kind of complicated. But it is really worth, to me, that's when hiring, that's the difference between a mid-level developer, in my opinion, and a senior developer for Angular, is if you really have a good understanding of RxJS, it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And actually, we have, if I can do a quick shout out to a past episode, we have a really great beginner RxJS episode with Corey Ryland in the archives of ngHouston. It was an older episode. It was really great, super simple. If you're having any issues with RxJS, go check out that beginner RxJS with Corey Ryland, because it's a great episode.
Corey's really good. Another good person at explaining things. He's so
great.
Yeah, I honestly still watch a lot of beginner RxJS stuff because I feel like you can never get too much, understanding it a different way or wrapping your head around the different operators and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's another really good episode, RxJS anti-patterns with Jeff Cross and Thomas Burleson.
Oh, nice.
That was a really great episode. And Jeff Cross, basically, because he does so much consulting with Narwhal, that he came on and did a breakdown of the most common mistakes that developers make with RxJS. It was a really great episode.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I think that's it for tonight, right? I think we kind of made this up in the beginning, but I really think this turned out to be a great episode. I thought this was a really good walkthrough. And you didn't have, Sam, I was half expecting something to go horribly wrong, but nothing did. This demo was really good.
Well, we completely forgot about him cutting out there, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. No. We can have another episode where we pick back up from that, or we can have another episode where we dive more into questions or anything like that. I'm always happy to come back.
So I think we should ask everyone who watches this to leave some comments, leave some questions, and let's watch the YouTube. Be nice in the YouTube comments, but let's watch the YouTube comments and see what kind of questions pop up over the next couple days, and then we will revisit. But I would always love to have you back on the show because I just think you're a great person. And tell Ken that we said hello, and Otto and all the Auth0 crew, because you guys are always welcome here. We love you.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thanks. I will pass on all of that. Yeah, we're an open book. If anybody has questions about, it doesn't have to be Auth0 specifically, but authentication, stuff like that. Oh, I should probably add a link / shout out to, we've got these new videos.
I like Auth because one of the nice things about Auth0 is there's so much going on with authentication that you guys are doing, but it's not just hey, use our products. It's hey, here's an option for you, but it's also so much teaching that I really love that.
We really don't want you to have to worry too much about all the details. That's sort of the point of the product. But if you do want to learn more about identity, Like that's part of what we do. And so this is our principal engineer, Vittorio, and he has a series of videos up on here about introduction to identity and covering all the different topics of identity.
So cool.
And they're really, really excellent. It's totally free. You don't even have to give them an email address. But we should definitely add a link to that. I will perilously add them to the chat here. But yeah, feel free to reach out anytime to me or Kim or Kapehe or Otto or anybody with questions about identity or Auth0 or just architecture questions. And if one of us doesn't know the answer, somebody else will. So.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And it's a great show. It was a great demo, great docs. And I hope you guys come back again soon.
So do I. It was great.
Thank you again. You guys have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.